Good morning. Can everybody hear me all right at the back? Okay. So as Kathy mentioned, my name is Travis Deacon, and I represent a team of researchers at Dalhousie and Memorial Universities in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Canada. And I'm presenting our research on a framework for human error analysis of emergency situations with focus on the offshore industry. So I'm going to talk about the purpose of our research. I'm going to discuss the human reliability analysis model that we used, identify emergency tasks and scenarios that we evaluated. We're going to talk about human error probabilities and consequences that were determined for the evacuation, escape, and rescue process in the offshore industry. We're going to combine the human error probabilities and consequences in a risk matrix to determine the tolerability of risk. Should risk reduction be required, then we look at a risk graph and bow tie graphs. And then we'll talk about the conclusions of the research and future work. So the reason for our research is to develop a framework for human error risk assessment and reduction that can be applied to various industries, whether it be aviation, chemical processing. The case that we looked at here was the offshore oil and gas processing industry. And through that research, we've identified high-risk tasks during the escape, evacuation, and rescue process, the EER process, of offshore oil and gas production in terms of human error. We've also included a tool to evaluate potential safety measures for reducing the risk of human error during offshore EER process. So the escape phase of EER we've defined as the time of the initiator, be it a hydrocarbon release or a fire and explosion, until arrival at the temporary safe refuge or muster point. The evacuation phase is the time of the offshore installation manager's decision to leave the rig until a safe distance has been achieved from the platform. And rescue is the time of recovery actions from rescue personnel on nearby vessels. Now, these three phases can coexist at the same time. For example, in the escape phase, if an individual who is moving toward the temporary safe refuge determines that there's no longer a safe path, they can initiate the evacuation phase for themselves and move towards evacuation. And indeed, the rescue process can occur as soon as the initiator occurs and the escape phase has begun, just to prepare for any individuals that will be evacuating to sea or prepare helicopters for helicopter evacuation. And this is a picture of the Petrobras production facility. You can see here we've got a helipad here for arrival and evacuation. And noting that many of the pathways, there are several pathways to get between areas. It's a very congested facility, as many oil and gas production facilities are, just because of the minimal space requirements. And notice that escape from any initiator, wherever it would occur on the platform, would also require movement away from the platform to achieve a safe distance where evacuation means are required. So the human reliability analysis model, the first step is to identify the emergency tasks that personnel must complete and scenarios that may occur. When these scenarios and tasks are identified, then you determine the human error probability for each task, as well as the severity of any consequences of an error. You combine the human error probabilities and consequences in a risk matrix to determine the tolerability of risk, and then a risk graph will determine the requirements of any safety measures, or safety barriers as they're also called, in order to effectively reduce the risk. The bow tie graph incorporates procedural HAZOP analysis of the EER process, as well as analysis of any potential safety barriers to determine how effective they are at reducing the risk. So this is just a picture of the framework that I just identified. As you can see, the first step is to choose your initiator, be it a gas release or a fire and explosion. So basically choose your scenario. And the second step is to choose your task to be evaluated. And conjointly, you determine the human error probability and consequences, and they combine together in the risk matrix. Now, when in the risk matrix, you determine if the risk is in a tolerable level. We use the as low as reasonably practicable principle, which I'll explain later. If so, then you move forward to the next step and just continue through your scenario and task analysis. If the risk does need to be reduced, then there is a separate risk reduction methodology included. So to identify the tasks and scenarios, we use the hierarchical task analysis tool, which identified emergency procedural tasks for personnel. The hierarchical task analysis starts with the end goal. In our case, it was the end goal of escape, the end goal of evacuation, and of rescue. And then they're divided into smaller tasks that can be more detailed and evaluated for human error probabilities. Scenarios have to be plausible scenarios. They have to be reasonable scenarios that could happen at the facility. And they have to encompass all levels of emergency situation, from minor emergency to major emergency. So the evacuation tasks in specific were divided into different means of evacuation. You have a bridge link to other platforms, helicopter evacuation. You have a motor-propelled lifeboat, the totally enclosed motor-propelled survival craft, TEMC for short. You also have floating life rafts, or individuals, if there are no other means available, can jump directly into the sea with survival suits. Now this is just a breakdown of the specific motor-propelled lifeboat evacuation tasks, just to give an idea of the detail. You can notice one step is individuals must fasten their seat belts. Another is all hatches must be closed and tightly secured. So this just gives an example of some of the types of tasks, whether they be simple actions or cognitive tasks. Just the detail that can be gone into for determining human error probabilities and for consequences of errors. These are the scenarios that we used in evaluating evacuation tasks. They start with the collision scenario of a jackup rig colliding with a fixed installation, a hydrocarbon release, and a fire and explosion. And we also included some other factors such as experience of operators, current weather conditions, and time of day for the scenario. And they go in increasing severity from the collision scenario to the fire and explosion to encompass all levels of emergency. Now, the human error probability we evaluated as the probability of an error in a group of people when a specific task is attempted. This is analogous to if you look at the emergency escape, evacuation, and rescue process as its own safety measure or layer of protection, then the probability of failure on demand is the human error probability. Human error probabilities can be evaluated through reliability data. There are some databases available with generic data that need to be made facility specific to get a more realistic view of the risk. One method of getting facility specific data and scenario specific data is using expert judgment techniques. Two of which I'm going to talk about are the success likelihood index methodology and the human error assessment and reduction technique, also known as HART. So SLIM, the success likelihood index methodology, was used in the analysis of the escape phase, and HART was used in the analysis of the evacuation phase. SLIM is a resource-intensive method. It requires multiple experts and assessors to generate one set of data. And HART is more resource efficient, designed to be used by a single assessor to come with a complete set of human error probability data. SLIM has some minor calibration involved, and HART calibration is an issue. It doesn't have its own internal calibration. In SLIM, each of the multiple assessors, all of their data combines for one set of results. So statistical analysis involved, and it becomes a less conservative technique, but perhaps a more robust technique. With HART, for each user, you get a set of human error probability results. So different users can have different results. The HART technique is also, it yields high human error probabilities more easily than the other techniques. It's more of a pessimistic technique. So analyzing consequences, this is our consequence severity table for the escape phase. Consequence severities are divided into 4 categories for the escape phase. Health of the personnel in question, the effect of an error on the egress path or movement to the temporary safe refuge, the effect on the muster initiator, and the effect on other personnel in different areas of the platform. Now, there are 4 categories. There are also 4 levels of severity, 1 to 4, 1 being the lowest and 4 being the highest, resulting from 0 effect to fatalities, or prevents other individuals from having a dry evacuation, from evacuating without having to go directly into the sea. Now, for the evacuation phase, only the health category is considered. They have the same severity levels, but the other 3 categories aren't included for evacuation. Consequence severities were determined from previous incident data, from major investigations through industry in the recent years, in past years. The escape phase, it was determined, was very dependent on the initiator, whether it be a hydrocarbon release, a fire and explosion. Man overboard scenarios were also analyzed in the escape phase. Evacuation phase, the most important factors of the specific scenario were the weather at the time of the incident and the sea conditions, as many evacuation methods involve movement through the sea, which is a very important factor. Now, combining the human error probabilities and consequence severities in a risk matrix can give an overall picture of the tolerability of the risk. It's divided into 3 different color-coded regions with the probability on the side and the consequence rating on the top. In the green region, if a risk is found in this area, it is determined to be broadly acceptable. So any safety measures incorporated at the time are considered sufficient. The yellow region is the tolerable if as low as reasonably practicable. So if cost-benefit analysis shows that the cost of further reducing the risk is prohibitive and any more risk reduction efforts would be very minor, then the risk is considered tolerable. The red region is the intolerable region, where the risk is simply too high to continue without further risk reduction. So in the escape phase, as can be expected, the highest risk tasks were determined for the fire and explosion scenario, which is the most severe scenario. Most of urgency is required. The lowest risk for the escape phase tasks was determined for the man overboard. Indeed, the muster to a temporary safe refuge had little effect on consequences for a man overboard scenario. There are tasks involved in the escape phase that include providing aid to others as necessary or as directed. So that task in the escape phase analysis becomes very important for a man overboard scenario, especially for the personnel who are present when the individual falls overboard. The other important phase for a man overboard scenario, of course, is the rescue phase tasks. Now, for the evacuation phase, the highest risk tasks involved movement in the sea, whether it was by the temp sea, the motor-propelled lifeboat, by the life raft, or by swimming in the ocean. Also, high-risk tasks included releasing of the motor-propelled life craft, avoiding damage, avoiding being washed up against the installation legs. Now, should the risk be at an intolerable level or can be further reduced, you use the risk reduction phase of the methodology, which is presented here. The first stage is to determine the frequency of exposure of individuals to that risk, as well as their potential to avoid negative consequences should an error occur. Use the risk graph to determine the required level of confidence of any safety measures. Now, the level of confidence is the mathematical reliability of any safety measures that you incorporated to reduce the risk. when you determine the required level of confidence of any safety measures for specific tasks, then you look at your available safety measures and you evaluate their reliabilities, their level of confidence. When you've done that, you build your bow tie graph and determine your overall reliability, or overall level of confidence for all of the safety measures incorporated for that one task. Now, the risk graph concept is taken from the Accidental Risk Assessment Methodology for Industries, ARAMIS. This was developed as a response to the Seveso II directive in Europe. It was developed across Europe, and it follows the conclusions from the risk matrix. So the risk graph and the risk matrix can work together. The risk graph determines the reliability of any safety measures in order to bring the risk into the yellow region of the risk graph, the tolerable if alarp state. Now, the reliabilities or level of confidence of safety measures can range from 0 being the lowest and 4 being the highest. Now, a level of confidence of 4 is rarely experienced in industry, rarely occurs. So the analysis of safety measures, safety barriers, it produces the design level of confidence for that safety barrier, be it a blast wall, an automatic shutdown mechanism, an automatic sprinkler system. Now, the design level of confidence is the level of confidence at the time of a proper installation of the safety barrier and a routine maintenance plan. Further, a safety audit must be performed to determine the actual level of confidence of the safety barrier in question. The safety audit yields an index which is included in the evaluation of the safety barrier. The safety audit and safety management system audit follows the principle that safety culture and safety management system affect risk control at a facility. And it also helps reduce any gaps between real and perceived risk at a facility. So this is an example of a procedural HAZOP that we've used for the task of turning the motor-propelled lifeboat to clear the installation, so aligning it away from the installation to ease the escape from the platform. And there are two failure modes identified in this task. The action is omitted, so the lifeboat is not properly aligned, or the action is in the wrong direction, so the lifeboat, for example, is aligned to aim it under the installation or aim it towards a platform leg instead of away from the platform. Now, in later stages, you look at the consequences, and then you determine the safety measures that can be used to prevent this from occurring. Now, one of the ideas in the current research was to take the potential safety measures and divide them into categories of prevention barriers, which are any safety measures that can be used to reduce the probability of an error occurring, and mitigation barriers, which can help control the consequences should an error occur. We've also divided any safety measures according to the hierarchy of controls. So inherent safety measures, passive engineered safety measures, active engineered safety measures, and procedural safety measures. This also, it helps in determining the potential level of confidence of these barriers as well. So this is an example of the bow tie. This was for the escape phase. The particular task we evaluated here is escape task 6 of 18 escape tasks. This task is to make the workplace safe and return process equipment to a safe state before continuing movement towards a temporary safe refuge. So there are 6 different failure modes that we determine can occur at this stage. An individual does not take the time to return the process equipment to a safe state. The individual partially does, but then leaves before necessary. An individual takes too much time, as time isn't a factor in the EER process. The individual takes too much time to return process equipment to a safe state and exposes themselves to unnecessary danger. And should an error occur at this stage, it was determined that the consequence severity was the most severe, level 4, and should any safety measures be included, it can be reduced to a less severe consequence severity, level 3, which still results in the potential for a severe injury. So it was also noted that you'll see barrier A here in the bow tie. This is a prevention measure, a rigorous training regime. And it was determined to have a mathematical reliability or level of confidence of 1. So a level of confidence of 1 will reduce the risk by a factor of 10. The level of confidence of 2 will reduce the risk by a factor of 100, and so on. So the original human error probability for returning process equipment to safe state was determined to be 0.08. If you incorporate a specific training regime, you can reduce the probability of an error by a factor of 10, so it becomes 0.008. If you also incorporate an automatic shutdown mechanism that could help return the process equipment to a safe state, then you can reduce the consequences should the individual an error occur during returning the process equipment to a safe state. And in this way, you can bring risks, even though you still have a possibility of a fatality, you have greatly reduced the risk from its original state. And you can bring risks into a tolerable, if a large state, using the risk reduction principle. So from the research, we've developed a framework to evaluate and reduce the risk of human error. We've incorporated the hierarchy of controls, inherent safety, engineered safety, procedural safety, into the procedural HAZOP and risk reduction, as well as the bow tie classification of prevention barriers and mitigation barriers. And we've combined different risk assessment techniques, like HART or SLIM, for example, with a comprehensive risk reduction technique in Aramis to create a more comprehensive technique for risk assessment and reduction. So in the future, we're looking at further validation of the current tool. The escape phase validation has been completed using a case study. The evacuation phase validation is currently in progress. Following that, complete analysis of the rescue phase, which was not included in the current work. So we're going to analyze for human error probability, consequence analysis, and again, risk reduction measures. And we'd just like to thank Petroleum Research Atlantic Canada and Nova Scotia Department of Energy, as well as Pengrowth, for the funding of this research. Thank you.